In the early 16th century, the Spanish crown unleashed waves of explorers, mercenaries and dreamers across the Atlantic, men who were not soldiers in the traditional sense, but desperate adventurers willing to risk everything for fortune, glory, and a chance to carve their names into history. Among them rose Francisco Pizarro, a man born poor, illiterate, abandoned by his parents, and raised as a swineherd in the rugged hills of Spain, a man who seemed destined for obscurity, yet who would rise through audacity, cunning, and ruthless ambition to bring down one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. With fewer than 200 men, Pizarro conquered the mighty Inca Empire, a civilization of millions stretching across deserts, jungles, and the towering Andes Mountains, and in doing so he rewrote the destiny of 2 continents forever. The Inca Empire, known to its people as Tawantinsuyu, was a golden backbone of power across South America, bound together by more than 20,000 miles of roads and bridges that threaded through valleys and peaks, linking cities, fortresses, and sacred sites in a network more advanced than anything in Europe. At its heart stood the Sapa Inca, a divine ruler believed to be the son of the sun god Inti, whose word was absolute law, whose armies could summon hundreds of thousands of warriors, and whose capital city of Cuzco gleamed with palaces and temples covered in sheets of gold. The Inca had no iron, no wheels, and no horses, yet they mastered the harshest landscapes, carved agricultural terraces into sheer mountainsides, built aqueducts that carried water across impossible distances, and commanded armies disciplined enough to conquer tribes across a vast and unforgiving land. It was a civilization that seemed unshakable, a kingdom destined to endure, yet destiny had already turned against them. For long before Pizarro set foot on their shores, a silent invader had arrived carrying death in its breath. Smallpox, carried from Europe by earlier voyagers, swept through the Andes like a storm of invisible fire, killing not only countless subjects, but also Huayna Capac, the great emperor, and his chosen heir, leaving the empire without clear leadership and plunging it into chaos. The empire was torn apart by civil war, as 2 brothers, Huáscar in the south and Atahualpa in the north, gathered massive armies and fought a brutal struggle for the throne, filling valleys with the bodies of the dead and tearing apart the unity that had once been the empire's greatest strength. By the time Francisco Pizarro returned in 1531 with fewer than 200 men, Atahualpa had triumphed over his brother, but the empire was weary, divided, and dangerously vulnerable, and the conquistadors sensed that fate itself had opened the door for his ambition. Pizarro's journey to this moment had been long and bitter, for his first expeditions along the Pacific coast had been disasters marked by starvation, disease, and mutiny. Yet he refused to abandon his dream and famously drew a line in the sand with his sword, declaring that on one side lay hunger, storms, and death, and on the other side lay ease and retreat, and 13 men stepped forward to join him, men who would later be remembered as the famous 13, the core of his conquest. Armed with cannons, steel swords, lances, muskets, and a handful of horses, weapons unknown to the people of the Andes, Pizarro marched south into the Inca realm, and every step was guided by a belief that boldness and deception could achieve what sheer numbers never could. In 1532 he learned that Atahualpa, fresh from victory in the Civil War, was camped with tens of thousands of warriors in the town of Cajamarca, and he sent word requesting a meeting, knowing full well that his only chance was to lure the emperor into a trap. Atahualpa, confident and dismissive, agreed, for he saw in the Spaniards not a threat but a curiosity, a handful of strange foreigners with shiny weapons and loud beasts that seemed too few to matter. And so he entered Cajamarca, carried on a golden litter, surrounded by thousands of unarmed attendants, walking directly into the jaws of Pizarro's plan. As the emperor entered the square, a Dominican friar named Vicente de Valverde stepped forward, holding a Bible and demanding that Atahualpa accept the Christian faith and submit to the King of Spain. But the Inca ruler, puzzled, lifted the strange object to his ear, waiting for it to speak, and when it remained silent, he cast it aside in scorn. The signal was given, and suddenly the quiet square erupted into thunder as cannons roared, muskets cracked, and steel clashed, while cavalry burst from hiding and charged into the crowd. Horses taller and stronger than any creature the Inca had ever seen, crashing into panicked attendants who had no weapons and no understanding of what they faced. The air filled with smoke and screams, the sound of gunpowder echoed against stone walls, and the discipline of the Inca army collapsed under the sheer shock of the ambush, for they had never encountered the terror of steel cutting flesh, nor the deafening roar of cannon fire tearing men apart. Amid the chaos, Pizarro himself lunged into the melee and dragged Atahualpa from his golden litter, seizing the emperor alive, while thousands of his followers were cut down in confusion, and in less than an hour the divine ruler of the Andes was a prisoner of fewer than 200 foreigners. The capture of Atahualpa was the decisive moment, for the Inca Empire was built upon his divine authority, and without him no order could hold. Yet even in captivity, Atahualpa sought to fight back with the only weapon he had left, the wealth of his kingdom. He promised Pizarro the greatest ransom in history, offering to fill a room 22 feet long by 17 feet wide with gold, and to fill it twice again with silver, and so treasures poured into Cajamarca from every corner of the empire. Statues of gods melted down, ornaments stripped from temples, and relics carried across mountains until the chamber gleamed with riches beyond imagination. The Spaniards stood in awe as the room filled, for never before had Europeans seen such concentrated wealth. Yet greed did not bring mercy, and rumors spread that Inca armies were gathering to free their emperor, leaving Pizarro with a terrible choice: release him and risk rebellion, or kill him and destroy the spiritual heart of the empire. In July 1533, Atahualpa was put on trial, accused of idolatry, treason and conspiracy, condemned in a proceeding that was nothing more than a formality, and on the day of his execution he was led to the square, where he was strangled by a garrote, his cries silenced and his body burned, and with his death the sun god's sun was extinguished forever. The Inca world trembled as its divine ruler perished, and Pizarro wasted no time marching on Cusco, the imperial capital, seizing the city in November 1533 with the help of thousands of native allies who hated Atahualpa's faction and welcomed the Spaniards as instruments of their revenge. Cusco fell with little resistance, its palaces looted, its golden temples stripped, its nobility subdued, and in less than a year the greatest empire of the Americas lay shattered under the boots of men who numbered fewer than 200. In 1535, Pizarro founded a new city on the Pacific coast, naming it Lima, the City of Kings, and from this stronghold, Spanish power spread across the Andes, siphoning off rivers of gold and silver that fueled the rise of Europe, while native populations were enslaved, exploited, and devastated by disease. Yet, even in victory, rebellion smoldered, for Manco Inca, installed by the Spaniards as a puppet ruler, soon rose against them, rallying thousands of warriors and laying siege to Cusco in a desperate attempt to drive the invaders out. And though he nearly succeeded, the uprising was crushed, forcing the last Incas to retreat into the mountain fortress of Vilcabamba, where resistance endured for nearly 40 years. Pizarro himself did not live long to enjoy his triumph, for his partnership with fellow conquistador Diego de Almagro collapsed into bitter rivalry, their factions waging civil war until, in 1541, enemies burst into Pizarro's palace in Lima and stabbed him to death, leaving the conqueror of an empire sprawled in blood beside a cross he had traced on the floor with his own hand. The story of Francisco Pizarro and the fall of the Inca Empire is one of the most astonishing and tragic in world history, for fewer than 200 men toppled millions, not by strength alone, but by exploiting the devastation of disease, the fractures of civil war, and the arrogance of rulers who underestimated the strange newcomers in their land. The conquest reshaped the destiny of two continents, filling Europe's coffers while silencing the temples of the sun, stripping palaces bare, and reducing a once mighty empire to ruin and memory. And so the question lingers: did Francisco Pizarro truly conquer the Inca Empire with fewer than 200 men? Or did he simply arrive at the moment when destiny, disease and division had already doomed a kingdom, leaving him only to deliver the final blow?